All right, live interview number 2 from the truck off the side of the road. Kristen Meghan's going to be here for the adventure. One of the first people to really publicly get some attention for questioning the efficacy of masks. And Kristen, you're probably aware there are many people suing the Biden administration right now over the First Amendment and saying that there were First Amendment violations, particularly with government collusion and big tech. This from Reclaim the Net. Biden censorship lawyers say questioning masks and vaccines often won't be protected by First Amendment. And they have a tweet from Attorney General Andrew Bailey. This is out of Missouri, one of the folks suing. He tweeted that the court asked the feds if all the emails between them and social media companies were real, because it seems like there's a lot here. And the feds were forced to admit that tens of thousands of pages of evidence are genuine. The judge questioned the feds on several hypotheticals, asking if the First Amendment applied. He asked if an American citizen questioning the safety or efficacy of masks or a vaccine was protected under the First Amendment. The feds answer, it could be, but often won't be. All right, what's your take?
That is absolutely ridiculous. Can you imagine anyone holding the argument that if you say asbestos is a known carcinogen, that it's not going to be protected under free speech? We're talking about science. And the irony is, I don't even know how this would be a free speech question when I've been on your show before talking about how the science has been around since the 1950s. So, I mean, they're just trying to politicize the science. And I think if anything like this were to even attempt to be a silenced issue, it would go all the way to the Supreme Court. And luckily, on the side of freedom, we have the majority there. But I think that actually would get more people from my profession to speak up, who are, at most in part, trained by the government.
So what if they say, listen, yes, you can say it depending on where you are. Like, it's not a First Amendment protected speech to question if, for instance, I want to say something on social media and I'm working in corporate news and a private company fires me over it. So, not necessarily saying you can't talk about it per se. They're just saying it's not always protected depending on where you're saying it, or like your employer, for instance, who the consequence may fall on because of, say, you have a private employer or something like that. What do you think about that? I mean, because maybe that's what they're intending there, to say, like, no, it's not that you can't question, like you have to stay at home and only talk to your kitchen stove about it. It's just that the First Amendment doesn't protect you in particular areas. And I have to be honest with you, the more I interview constitutional attorneys, the more, I don't know if it's the Constitution itself or the way it's interpreted nowadays or what, but it does seem like we have far fewer rights than we think we do, at least depending now on the way the courts are interpreting it. I'm not saying that's a Constitution issue. It could be a court issue, but it seems like we have fewer options than maybe many of us think.
I think you're absolutely right. It's all about a matter of interpretation. But I think we have to look at least the most recent decades, within the last 20 years. What would change to where interpretation? I mean, think about it. People, I mean, I'm a veteran, and people can literally burn a flag, and it upsets a lot of people, but I don't have to agree with it. But as long as they bought it and didn't steal it from somebody, that's protected under the First Amendment. But those are things that were decided a long time ago. So what changed to where now we question the interpretation of the Constitution? But in the relation to the media has extra protection because they have the right to a free press. And I don't care if you actually work for 3M who makes masks. I don't care if you work for Kimberly Clark who makes masks. It doesn't matter. When we are talking about questioning something, that is literally how science works. You constantly verify confidence in science. You look at the hierarchy of evidence. This is not about who is saying it and in what situation. This is about making this Orwellian. This is, I have the book behind me in my office. This is about doublespeak. It's about selective censorship. And that right there kind of showcases that this country is spiraling. And, it reminds me, I know we're both moms, the movie Finding Nemo, where they don't touch the boat. That's
Yeah.
me. I poke the bear all the time because once we lose our rights, we do not get them back.
All right, before we go any further, because I do want to read a couple more things from this tweet that happened apparently in court, but y'all, help me get some internet at the new homestead. Go to AllisonWinePromo.com, and hopefully I won't have to do live streams with the side of the road anymore. I'm sitting on this I don't know, it's like in between two highways right now, and I'm hoping that I don't get removed by like the sheriff during this live stream, but I think maybe that would make for good YouTube anyway, or all the other platforms. I'll be kicked off YouTube soon, so it doesn't matter. But anyway, the greatest wines you've ever had, and you know you need a drink watching this live stream. So go to AllisonWinePromo.com, 50% off some Extremist Altitude Malbecs, 50% off shipping, and it's a great Father's Day present. It's wine with a cause. You keep me in business. My sponsors are one of the main ways that I keep these interviews coming. So go check them out, AllisonWinePromo.com. You cannot get these wines at the grocery store. Why would you want to? Buy them from somebody who talks to you from their car with a 3-year-old in the back seat and juggles all of this. Of course, I'm not drinking it right now because I wouldn't be able to operate my vehicle, but you have a glass for me. If you want to get some amazing coffee, though, you also know you can go to twinenginecoffee.com/Allison, USDA certified organic, high altitude roast, extremist altitude roast, light roast, dark roast, everything in between, and a Caturra tea if you're a tea drinker. Also, they make sampler packets, which would make for great presents too. Another great Father's Day present if your dad is a coffee drinker. And if you don't like your dad, then get it for yourself. Okay, Kristen, let's go back to this, because in the tweet, he writes, the judge also asked Biden's lawyers if the First Amendment covered Americans' right to say that Biden is responsible for high gas prices and inflation. Their answer, it depends. The judge also asked them if the First Amendment applied to Americans' right to say that the 2020 election was stolen. Their answer, it depends, which now apparently you can question on YouTube. I'm not really sure what happened there. But yeah, so they they're basically saying it depends, it depends. I think the people who would align with this perspective would say, yeah, duh, of course it depends. The First Amendment doesn't cover speech everywhere and anywhere. Apparently, you can't say it. You can't say it like we said earlier. Like, I could have gotten fired and probably wouldn't have been able to sue my corporate news bosses if I had said something they didn't like. But then again, I signed a contract saying they basically owned everything I said. So that's probably not a great example. But like, let me give you an example. We're at Mount Rushmore about a week ago, because we drove from Washington to Florida because we moved to Florida. Clearly, that's my problem here. I'm sitting on the side of the road in Florida. But who doesn't do that when they come to Florida? It's so beautiful. So we're at Mount Rushmore, and there's signs everywhere. Well, not everywhere, but like, let's say a lot of spots as you're walking up to the actual, rock sculptures that say this area is designated for the First Amendment, like this, First Amendment activities. And it was weird to think, like, so does that mean you can't, at a national park, federal lands, you don't have the First Amendment protection everywhere to you? What exactly does that mean? So I was sitting here thinking, like, maybe I'm missing something, but I just throw that back to you because I do think probably, just to play devil's advocate, they would say, well, what shocks you about that? Of course, there are times and places. I think in this particular case, though, the attorneys are trying to show that there is so much collusion between the government and these social media platforms that you don't really know where one ends and the other one begins.
Exactly. And just comparison, in this article, it showcases a tweet where it was brought up, that the CDC put limitations on J&J's experimental injection because of safety concerns. But if you as an individual posted that, you were thrown in, social media jail. It's frustrating because it makes you want to leave all these platforms, but they're a necessary evil. But I am glad to see that even on certain platforms, more discussions are starting to be allowed. And I also think that's because there's a huge shift to alternative platforms and a lot of revenue is being lost. But this article should have opened the eyes for a lot of people. It reminds me, I had a friend years ago, maybe 10, 11 years ago, who found out it was illegal to dance in front of the Thomas Jefferson statue, and threw a dance party of 6 people and was body slammed and arrested for dancing.
Oh. Did you see recently, I think it might have been on Memorial Day, there was a children's choir that was singing the Star Spangled Banner in the Capitol, and they were stopped because they weren't allowed to demonstrate in the Capitol. Did you see that?
Yeah, I don't know when freedom became so offensive, but I did see that. And I identify with ideology as a voluntarist. I'm very freedom-minded. And as long as what you're doing isn't harming another person or their property, and I don't mean harm as in hurt your feelings because you're a snowflake. I mean, we don't need to be so, we have self-governance. We can respect the fact that, like, I'm not going to, protest next to a wedding because I'm kind like that. Even if I disagree with something, we need to have a little bit more uh, open accountability without the government putting their hand in it. But I've never understood these free speech zones. To me, that's an absolute violation of our First Amendment. It doesn't say that we have to have a coned off area with certain square footage to air our grievances about the government or a certain topic or promote an idea.
Yeah, I thought that was really weird. Okay, I guess final question, since you've been talking about this, a lot of the stuff that you've been saying is finally now becoming more of a mainstream talking point and less of a conspiracy theory. What do you think is the role of I guess sort of this isolation booths of information, basically the lack of information that people are able to get because of the suppression of these, whether it's a scientific paper or somebody like you that's talking about it from your experience. What's the role of that in like the reaction that people give you? Because you've gone from somebody, I'm sure, got probably still gets a lot of backlash for the stuff you said, but perhaps it's getting a little bit easier to be the person who's saying the stuff you're saying now. What's the role, I guess, in the way that you see people react to you and the stuff that you're saying, especially journalists, given the censorship of the social media platforms?
Well, there's kind of two angles here. One is that things that I have been saying for the past 3 years, I've known for 21 years. And new studies have come out, like the health impacts of the breathing barrier, especially for pregnant women. And I have been saying that for years. So when people said, "Where's the studies? Where's the studies?" And I say, "Well, they're not on the internet." Well, I happen to have 3 old laptops, and I was able to pull off the studies. And I've done lives where I've showed people, try and Google this, try it and use your Brave browser and find this. And for some people, it clicks. Oh my gosh, she's telling the truth. And the only reason I still have these studies is because I have to give training on them, in respiratory protection training, why pregnant women shouldn't don respirators. This is stuff that's been around, but it got pulled. And the very ironic aspect is I always use the government's own data that other people don't know how to find. And I'm like, oh, for example, the wildfires right now, they're pushing mask and N95 respirators for wildfires. That's not appropriate personal protective equipment. And what do? I go find all the CDC documents and all the old articles from the California wildfires where the government said neither masks or N95 respirators are going to protect you. So I just like to use the government's own data.
Yeah.
And then when people actually, the problem is people don't want to click on links or studies. So I try to just do screenshots and post the links to get people's attention. And I have flipped a lot of people. And if you pay attention to current medical student, he's also already has his PhD. Kevin Bass is one of those people. I believe I was on one of his crazy kook lists that he had the quacks. And then he was just recently on my podcast. So people are waking up and realizing they're being lied to. And I kind of don't blame them, because if they can't find data, they're going to go at what the CDC is saying. It's a public health agency people are supposed to believe in. But then when you realize that they don't even have the correct subject matter experts speaking about these issues, people kind of go on their own rabbit holes. And there is quite a shift, because these things are now being openly admitted and discussed, especially when the CDC is now emphasized on indoor air quality rather than the breathing barriers.
I think you're right that just the short-term memory issues or the long-term memory issues, I guess, that we have, that we're just bombarded with information, and even sort of the most well-meaning people, it's easy to forget that the government said the exact opposite just 6 months ago or a year ago. Even when I was a journalist, we weren't good at paying attention to that kind of thing. And honestly, as sort of the news business recycles people so quickly, and you have younger and younger journalists coming in and they don't know the ropes, they don't know what they're covering, they have no institutional memory. I mean, all that plays into how bad the media is. Not to say there isn't also intentional manipulation and puppeteering and stuff going on in the background, but it's helpful, like you said, to show that it's all out there. It's not necessarily like a lot of this stuff is public record. It's not even secret. It just requires doing a little bit of research. And that's probably why you're still alive. I mean, I asked Whitney Webb why she thinks she's still alive, and she says because the stuff that she shows people is is all out there. She just compiles it. So anyway, I'm glad you're still alive. You can come on my show,
You
Kristen.
know, as you know, I blew the whistle on the Air Force's involvement in weather modification in 2010, and I find old videos where people actually think I'm deceased, and I'm like, nope, still here.
Speaking of all that, since I have you, what are your thoughts on the wildfires in New York and everything right now? I had a lot of people on my editorial board. I should give everybody a shout out over there at AllisonMorrow.locals.com. We're wondering about, the hype around this and climate change. Um, given, like, for instance, Project Veritas had that undercover video with the technical director saying the next CNN hype was going to be climate change after COVID.
Mhm.
And, you got masks out again. And, in the West, we were so used to wildfires, it wasn't necessarily a big deal. But this is obviously, I don't know, it seems like this is unique for the Northeast. So maybe that's why it's making a lot of news. But I had some questions from people about talking about weather modification related to the wildfire issue, when it often gets pegged with climate change. And I'm just curious, what do you think about that? I don't know. You're the expert on that.
Yeah, so obviously I don't know when they do it, and I only know about the chemical acquisition and the military involvement. But I mean, think about it. I know this is a silly comparison, but people always joke, if time travel was real, if you change something over here, it's going to affect something over here. So if you are steering, I mean, do you know that on Good Morning America, Ginger Z did a whole segment on it? So if we're cloud seeding, if we're doing a stratospheric aerosol injection, if we're taking from one place, it's going to disrupt another. We need to just let nature, work itself out. But if we're going to do this, why aren't they geoengineering and cloud seeding up in Canada? We did it for the Ho Chi Minh Trail. We flooded it. They have this technology. But I've had people come to me, and I'm not saying I agree with this, but from a lot of people that have showed me the color of the smoke, their signs and symptoms, the smells, they're saying it's very sweet. That to me is an alarm that it's benzene. So what burned? What is the propellant here? What's going on? How did this start? Why are there so many fires? This is very strange. And I'm not saying this is the reason, but I wouldn't put anything past our government, our one world government, to do something to raise awareness to things like climate change. But all I know is that regardless of how or why this happened, they're not even telling people, just like in East Palestine, how to shelter in place. So if anyone's listening that's in the area of the smoke, I just want to say, you shelter in place and you shut off your HVAC system. And if you have any filters for your furnace system that you haven't installed yet that are clean, especially if it's a HEPA filter, if you have a box fan or a large fan, you place that filter behind the fan and you let it clean inside your home. These are things you're not hearing from the governor of New York. They're just telling people to slap on N95 respirators, not even telling them be clean shaven. I mean, they don't work anyway, but it's so ridiculous that I actually learned these things from the government and they're not even telling people how to be safe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's really interesting. I heard that about the smell too.
Yeah.
Kristen, anything that you want to add before we go? I have to have you come back on and talk about that Ginger Z segment. We need to do something on that because that's crazy. I mean, I when I was in TV news, and I was an environmental reporter, that's my specialty, and I was one of the very few who covered it full time for television news in the whole country. And I would have thought that was nuts. I had never heard of cloud seeding before. And then when I saw her talking about it, it's just an accepted positive reality. Like, there's no controversy. It's the same thing as like the DEI stuff. Like, it's just accepted as like it's just this great, amazing thing by journalists. They don't realize, or they're purposely leaving it out, that there's a lot of controversy over these topics. When I saw her put that up, I was shocked. And she's like, it was too expensive to cloud seed all the time back when I was in journalism school, but now we can do it all the time, and it's awesome. You got to come back and talk about that. But anyway, final closing thoughts before we go.
I would just say, you're right. We do need to do a whole show on that because I have a lot of opinions. But I would just say, I have my hands in a lot of things because I'm an industrial hygienist and environmental specialist, which is an exposure scientist. I would just ask your viewers to not forget about the people of East Palestine and neighboring areas. I can't speak about it too much, but I'm actually working on a documentary about it. And the things that I'm finding within the EPA should scare a lot of people that didn't even know what synergistic toxicity was. So I would just say, pay attention to what's going on. And when you have things like a Trump indictment, I neither love or hate the guy, but these are obvious distractions. So just please pay attention to the health impacts in this country. In East Palestine is probably one of the worst environmental disasters in my lifetime, and people really need to pay attention and help those people.
Okay. Kristen Meghan, where can people follow you? Tell them where to ask you.
Yeah, I have a podcast. I just concluded season 1. It's called Vets and Visionaries with Kristen Meghan on the We the Patriots USA Rumble channel. But I am most active and get very spicy at night with the liberals on Twitter, and my handle is at Kristen Meghan.
Okay, awesome. Thanks for coming back on. Thanks everybody for watching. See you next time.